Hi, everyone. This is Stephanie Krupsak with the Pure Vermont Living podcast. With me today, I have Gary Robinson. He works for TIPA, which is a manufacturer of high-performance certified compostable packaging. Gary serves as the Director of Public Affairs. In this capacity, Gary seeks to build external relationships and collaborations to help advance consumer access to composting and the acceptance of compostable packaging. Gary is a self-declared eco-advocate and has been advancing innovation in packaging and sustainability for 28 years. His sustainability journey was first inspired by college professor Dr. Susan Silke at Michigan State University. That inspiration was then actualized with his first professional career as a packaging engineer at Kraft Foods, where he developed innovations for the beverage division and supported the commercial launch of Capri Sun in North America. After Kraft, Gary worked with the Amway Corporation, setting up a global supply chain in India, where exposure to the environmental challenges in India established a sense of urgency and accountability to deliver sustainable solutions. Gary is always hungry to learn and build new skills. Since those early engagements, he has gone on to lead new project development for Newell Rubbermaid, build the first global packaging department for the Home Depot, was a director of procurement and engineering, and worked for BillerudKorsnas to develop compelling 3D formable paper innovations as an alternative to plastic. More recently, Gary worked as a consultant for Synaptic Packaging, where he supported major brands and startups in developing sustainability strategies and product roadmaps. So thanks so much for being here today.
Stephanie, it's great to be here. Thank you so much for the introduction. I had to smile as you were giving introductions. I think you're one of the few people that I know who've ever been able to pronounce BillerudKorsnas right in the first try. So.
Perfect. Well, I believe when we first met, you were working for them.
That's correct.
So maybe that could be something to do with it. So maybe let's tell that story about how we first met.
Yeah, no, it's so fun. I remember very clearly. You were working with Durafiber, and we were in the process of building commercial relationships with laminators in North America. And we were looking at collaborating to do some proprietary development activities between BillerudKorsnas and Durafiber, and it was a very, very good relationship.
Yeah, and I was looking back at emails. I'm like, what year was that again? And it was 8 years ago. So time definitely flies. And we also were at the Pack Expo in Chicago. So we met up there too. Both of our companies were there. So yeah, so quite a while ago. And it's been great to kind of keep in touch throughout the years.
Yeah, it's definitely, I mean, you build great relationships on this journey of life, and you keep those relationships close. And it's a real honor to be back here working with you again, now that I'm with TIPA.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe let's get into a bit more about the company and tell us more about how it works within the circular economy. It's a really interesting concept.
Yeah, so TIPA, we make a portfolio of high-performance, certified, compostable, flexible packaging. And so what our material uniquely does is our material uniquely works in the fact that when you put it into a compost operator, it actually breaks down just like you would have normal organic matter break down. And so we don't leave residual plastics, we don't leave ecotoxicity. It's a very healthy, end-of-life and responsible solution for food and food products.
Do you want to tell us a little bit more how it actually breaks down in the composting process?
Yeah, so let's maybe back up a little bit and talk about composting and understand, what is composting, what's the value behind composting and how does it all work? So I think it's always important to tell a bit of the bigger picture story, because a lot of people struggle to understand, why should I compost or how do I compost? And the bigger picture story is that composting is potentially one of the most strongest levers that we have today to reduce the effects of global warming. See, carbon in the atmosphere, when you compost, actually gets entombed into the soils. And so what we're seeking to do is we're seeking to take the organic waste, which would be your food waste and or your yard waste, and keep that material in circularity, right? So when you have, for example, in your trash can today, you've got about 35% of your trash can at home contains organic waste. Well, that organic waste goes from your trash into a landfill, especially here in North America. In the landfill, that becomes methane gas. And methane is generated when organic waste degrades in the absence of oxygen, right? And methane is an 80 times more potent greenhouse gas emission compared to CO2. Now that's pretty significant because when we look at like U.S. Population, U.S. emissions, we find that that emission from that methane is about equivalent to 58.6 million cars on the road. So if we can find a way to actually capture that organic waste out of the landfill and divert it to a proper end of life, which would be composting, then we have the ability to actually make a very significant impact on global warming. And what's beautiful about this is the and, because sustainability is one on the and. And the and is that not only are we reducing greenhouse gas emissions with global warming, but we're also creating nutrient-rich, healthy compost soils. And these compost soils are what are commonly referred to as super soils. And by super soils, basically, they're bringing nutrients to the plants. They stabilize the root systems. They retain more water, which enables the plants to survive through drought conditions better. They're more robust to prevent things like erosion, right? And so all these things are these wonderful benefits that come with capturing your organic waste and moving it into a composting system. So we look at the process, the big picture, if you will, of how do we keep that organic material in circularity, right? From the time you harvest something to the time you consume it, to the leftover scraps that are residual, and getting that back into the compost pile. Well, compostable packaging is a key piece of keeping that wheel spinning, right? So instead of it falling off the cliff and going into a hole, which would be a landfill, compostable packaging becomes a benign ride-along and a delivery vehicle to capture that organic waste, keep it moving, and get it over into a compost operator. And when we think about organic food products and food waste for that matter, or food scraps for that matter, consumers, there's always kind of a yuck factor, right? I mean, who really wants to touch something that's messy or dirty or stinky, etc.? And this is yet another value why compostable packaging becomes so very important, because it allows you to move that responsibly forward without having to do all the rehandling, retouching, depackaging, all these other things that might have to go on. If you have a salad bag that goes bad, the salad bag and the compostable package all go straight into the compost bin. Now, in the compost bin, what happens is there's a variety of technologies in composting. There's industrial composting and there's home composting. And TIPA's products, what's beautiful about them is they're certified for both, right? We can go either direction. And that's a really big statement, Stephanie, because home composting is significantly more technically challenging for a company like TIPA. And that showcases the strengths of our technology because of the fact that we have achieved both of those thresholds. Are you familiar with industrial and home composting?
No, maybe you talk a little bit more about that to elaborate.
Sure. Okay. So industrial composting is what you would get in large-scale composting operations, right? So much like today, your trash goes off to a waste management company, and you've got a big facility that processes it. Industrial composting is the equivalent of that for organic material. And it's large-scale operations. It's mechanized operations. So it's heavy equipment, heavy machinery. But what happens is the material gets composted under very controlled conditions, okay? And that includes controlling temperatures, controlling moisture levels, and stimulating micro activity, right? Microbiological activity, because those are the three components that basically break down the organic matter. In industrial composting, there's a variety of different technologies, the most common of which is probably the windrow, but there's a lot of emerging technologies in that space as well. Industrial composting facilities typically run at higher temperatures, which is really important for the degradation process. And they have a lot of, like I said, microbial activity. Home composting, on the other hand, which happens like in your backyard, for example, that's usually done through an individual consumer managing the process. The temperatures typically don't go as high, and as a result of that, the degradation process tends to take a little longer when it's in a compost pile. But with TIPA's materials, because we're certified for both industrial and home composting, both are appropriate pathways for us. And what's beautiful about it is if you take your TIPA material and you put it into a properly managed compost pile, it almost feels like magic, because when you're done, you pull it up and you got beautiful black soil with no residuals. And when you get certified compostable, which is an important term, certified compostable, means that it goes through a battery of independent third-party validation testing to ensure that the process works. So when we develop a new technology, we develop a new product, we get audited, if you will, or we submit ourselves to auditing by third-party inspectors to make sure that our products, when they break down in the compost bin, do not have ecotoxicity. They do not leave residual plastics, right? They actually degrade the way they're supposed to degrade. And that's something that takes a lot of work and something we're very proud of to say that we are certified compostable.
I think that's so many great points because, when things are compostable, as you can mention, that not everything can be composted at home because it needs those higher temperatures. So I think it's great that TIPA provides a product that can be either. So it's easy for consumers. What are some of the products that you'd find in your packaging?
Yeah, so our products are really best suited for anything that's in that circularity of organics, right? Anything that you want to keep those food scraps, organic materials in circularity is where we play the strongest, right? So we play the best. So it'd be anything from like your salad kits to fresh produce to your breads to lidding for things like meats and lidding for processed foods, if you will. We do a lot with like stand-up pouches, candy bars and snack foods, zipper pouches, these sort of things. All these are really wonderful opportunities where TIPA's products excel. And one thing that's really nice also about the TIPA products is that we don't compromise on delivering the convenience and the solutions to which you as a consumer and the brands desire, right? Consumer behavior is always a tricky thing, right? And we all want the convenience factor. We all want to have the package and the brand look and perform to our expectations. It's a big part of building a relationship with the brand and choosing the products that you choose to have in your household. And so what's beautiful about TIPA is that we're delivering all those high performance expectations that a brand and a consumer want, but we're also doing so with a very responsible end of life. And that's no small accomplishment. We get both of those is a pretty arduous technical path to which we've carved to get here.
Yeah, definitely, because I feel that recycling really isn't the answer anymore because it's only a Band-Aid, if you will, like a fix. But if it's a full circular life cycle where the product can actually be put back into the earth is really quite amazing. And then that you are working with these brands that have organic, healthy products. And I think it is great too that how this type of flexible packaging can almost imitate plastic in a way, but it provides that kind of easy use and flexibility, but then you can also compost it. So I just think it's a super great product that I'm hoping more companies catch on to and incorporate into their packaging.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought up the idea of recycling because that's a very interesting topic to unpack a little bit. Some neat technology that a lot of people don't realize. We're dealing in the space of flexible packaging. And I can recall back years ago, I think you may have seen my bio, that I started off working with Kraft Foods and I started developing things like the Capri Sun pouch. I've worked in the cereal business where, I made cereal packaging. I've done a lot of different things in my career. But something that an average consumer might be surprised to learn is that if you go to your pantry and you grab a box of cereal and you open that bag up, if you were to cut that bag and put underneath a microscope, you're going to find that some of these bags have up to 7 layers of different materials in any one bag, which is really hard to believe that something that thin could have that many different layers. But that's real, and that's what happens in these packages. That's one of the things that makes flexible packaging so incredibly effective is the fact that they can condense a lot of technology into a very small, very lightweight package. All right, so that's the upside. The downside is that when you fuse all those materials together, they're not recyclable. And that's the hard reality that the world's waking up to, is that when you take something that thin and the layers are such tiny, tiny layers, the ability to explode and break those apart in any meaningful way is simply not happening. It doesn't happen. And technically, it's very likely it's not going to happen. And so we're waking up to the reality of the fact that all this flexible packaging we've got in the marketplace is vexed with that challenge. And how do we fix that challenge, right? And there are those that are working on trying to fix it through various recycling technologies. But we're looking at it and we're saying, you know what, there's a better way to do this, right? There's a better way that doesn't create a systemic issue in our environment, right? So number one, those flexible plastics are not recyclable today. And number two, it's the fact that the plastics that are out there are bioaccumulating, right? They don't go away. If we leave a package on the floor today, we come back in hundreds of years, it'd still be sitting there, right? And so that's what we're looking at with the certified compostable packaging, is that it allows us to get those organics into motion. It allows us to capture that organic waste and move it in a very responsible way back to create healthy, nutritious soils that can refeed regenerative agriculture. So we just see this as a much more effective and efficient solution, especially around single-use packaging and things that contain food.
And back to what you talked about before about, the composting and the different timeframes that might take to do that. Maybe with TIPA, what are the different timeframes of composting at home versus industrial? Or do you have examples of how long that would take to actually go back into the soil fully?
Yeah, so when you go through a certified compostable package, there are certification bodies that require you to pass, as I mentioned before, very strict standards. And the standard that applies to our industry, there's a couple, but the one specifically I'm going to mention now is the ASTM D6400. And I know that's a technical mouthful for a lot of people who are listening, but if you want to look it up, and if you're the kind of person who likes to do research, you can definitely take a look at that. And that standard requires the package to degrade, if my memory serves me correct, in 84 days, and less than 10% by weight needs to be residual on a 2 millimeter sieve. So basically the process is you put it into a compost pile, and after 84 days, you take a screen that has gaps in the screen of 2 millimeters, and there should be nothing left on that screen, right? That's the one of the criteria. As I mentioned before, there's a multitude of criteria that we have to go through in order to pass, and that can include, or it does include, I should say, ecotoxicity, right? We're making sure that there's not microplastics, that there's nothing toxic in the soil. There's the degradation process, and then there's the biodegradation. Sorry, disintegration and biodegradation, to say that correctly.
Okay. Very, very interesting. Yeah. So, and I know we also talked last time we chatted about the kind of countertop composting 2 options that are available, which are super great. I know you're very much into those, and I really want one too after chatting with you about that. Maybe talk a bit how those work too.
Yeah. So we're still studying that, to be honest with you. I mean, that's a very progressive topic. It's one that it's frankly untested yet. We're still kind of digging into it to understand. But there's an emerging trend and a lot of interest out there with these, what we call in-vessel systems. And in-vessel systems are basically appliances. And they're appliances that you can plug into your house and plug into your wall. And they use heat and agitation and sometimes microbial additives. But basically what they're seeking to do is to accelerate the decomposition of organic waste right there in your own kitchen, right there in your own household. And there's also derivatives of the technology that are being used for pet waste. And there's derivatives of the technology being used on commercial scale. So there's pilot case studies of these large in-vessel machines, like the size of this room, that are being used at various drop-off locations where consumers can bring their organic waste, put it in the vessel, and basically it grinds it, it dehydrates it, and it turns it into a precursor to compost. Okay. And it's important to note that what comes out of those machines is not compost. Making compost is kind of like making good wine, right? if you drink it too early, wine that is, if you drink wine too early, it's going to be a little harsh and not fully mature yet. But if you give it time, it becomes into something beautiful. Compost follows a very similar analogy where when it first comes out of these machines, for example, it's immature. It's still not quite stable. And so what you need to do is you need to add a time factor to it. And when you add a time factor to it, it basically matures. And as it matures, it becomes more stable and becomes all the benefits that we discussed a few minutes ago.
Very, very cool. I think that's all super interesting. And again, back to when you were discussing how composting with like TIPA packaging that's compostable versus plastic, it breaks down in, I think you said 84 days versus hundreds, maybe thousands of years where it just turns into microplastics. It never actually goes anywhere, disintegrates, it kind of stays. So it's, I think, very interesting, and it's great to see companies like TIPA moving things into this direction because it has to happen. And maybe back to the company as a whole, what are some of the maybe long-term goals that you're working on?
Yes, TIPA seeks to be a category leader in advancing compostable packaging innovation. And we are a startup, and we are growing very aggressively. And with that, we are asserting our leadership in all facets of the industry. And it's something that we're proud of and something that we work very hard towards, right? Because we see that we're, especially in North America, that we are on the front end of this development cycle, and that we have an opportunity to be a leader and to influence, the policies and what it's going to take in order to get access to composting in everybody's household, right? And so it's something that we're very heavily involved in, and we're very excited about it.
I think that's great. It's like a two-part action that you are working on composting at home, but then also the company provides this great product. So very much applaud your work and TIPA for that. Maybe explain a bit more about the overall environmental impact of TIPA and this type of packaging, what the effects are versus traditional packaging.
Yeah, happy to. Actually, I wanted to add one more comment on that previous question. There's a lot of advocacy growth happening in the space of composting right now. And there's a couple of major trade bodies that are leading that. And for your listeners, be happy to list a few of those if they want to get engaged. But there's the Biodegradable Products Institute. There's the U.S. Compost Council. There's another group called the Compost Manufacturers Alliance, which focuses on working with compost operators to make sure that compostable products are being properly accepted. There's also large groups such as the Plant-Based Products Council, which is working to support composting as it relates to creating that organic circularity that we discussed earlier. There's a new consortium that is the U.S. Compost Infrastructure Coalition, and they're working on supporting funding to build infrastructure in North America. And then on top of that, most recently, which we're very proud of, is the Closed Loop Partners has now kicked off a closed loop composting consortium, which is a investment portfolio that basically is involving a variety of very large brands to include, just top of mind, PepsiCo, Target, Kraft Foods, and TIPA as part of that. And so we're very, very pleased to be part of that and be part of that leadership group and seeking to work with all these different industry partners to write that playbook, right? Because as we talk about how do we get expansion of consumer access, these are the parties that are coming together to set the stage for that. And we're doing a lot of work to engage with legislators and with the legislators trying to write the policies and the rules of engagement so that we can grow and grow in a very responsible way. And that's frankly exciting because with composting, the fact that we don't have that legacy of infrastructure gives us an opportunity to do it and do it right. You talked about the plastics and waste crisis that we're running into with bioaccumulation of plastic waste. That's something that we're all trying to dig our way out of a problem, right? And it's not getting any better. We're on the other side of the equation. We're on the equation where, hey, this has great benefits, great opportunities to impact the environment, and we're going to build it. And so it's a place for visionaries. It's a place for people who want to be leaders. It's not a place for, naysayers, right? This is a place where we need to be looking forward and moving our way towards executing that. Now, a second ago, you asked me about, what are the environmental impacts? And the environmental impacts are very strong. They're really tied to that global greenhouse gas emissions that we talked about, with the fact that all that organic waste that's going into a landfill is producing methane. And that is a huge, huge driver, right? We just got out of COP26, which was where all the world leaders came together to talk about how we're going to address global warming. Well, if you were following the news feeds coming out of that conference, one of the number one deliverables that they came out of was that we got to reduce methane, right? Methane is like the first step that we've got to do. As an example, California did an aerial study of the entire state where they flew over top the state and scanned all of their emissions and quantified them. They found that 41% of their emissions from methane were coming from their landfills, right? So here we are again. How do you get methane out of your landfills? You got to cut down the organic material and you got to move it into composting. And that's what we're trying to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, traditionally it was just, awareness and not realizing what you're doing. If you put your, biodegradable materials, your banana peels with your trash, one maybe would have thought, oh, that might help it break down and be beneficial, but actually it's pretty terrible. So yeah, it's just awareness and letting people know what they can do. And those organizations you mentioned, I'll have those listed too as resources for listeners, because yeah, it's good to know where to start, where to turn to learn what to do. And now you know. So everybody listening, now they know that they shouldn't do that. So if you didn't know before, that's okay. Now you do. Now you can take the proper steps. Another point I like to talk about too is you have these, tabletop composting services that you mentioned, or devices, that it's not as easy if you don't live in the countryside, if you don't have your backyard or your backfield you can throw your compost in a bin and not have to look at it or smell it, because it's not a very pleasant thing always. But to know that there are options if you are in the city for urban composting. There are agencies that you can drop it off to that collect it. So it's really good to be aware of that, and start kids young. I'm trying to get a children's book published where it talks about urban composting for kids and families. So it's just kind of making it a family affair, make it aware in your home and in your company too, even your break room in your office. That's all part of it too. So yeah, every small step counts.
Yeah, and let's make this fun. Let's make it personal for your listeners. Here's a little challenge I would have for you and for all your listeners, if you're not doing it already. Just set a bucket aside or a bag aside in your kitchen. And for the next week, every bit of organic scraps, instead of putting in your trash can, put it in a separate bag, put it in a separate bucket, right? And at the end of the week, when you go to the take your trash to the curb, look at how much is in that little bucket. And if you really want to be progressive, put it on a scale and weigh it. There's a EPA WARM study, WARM WARM study, where they give an equivalent credit of 1 pound of CO2 for every pound of wet organic waste that you throw in the trash. Okay? So if you want to have a direct impact in your household to reduce global warming, set that bucket of organic waste on the scale, keep it out of the landfill, and take your own personal credit for helping to reduce global warming. And that's real. I mean, that's a very, very real thing that you can do today as a listener.
Yeah, I love that. So thank you. Yes, we challenge everybody listening. We'll have to do a challenge check-in. So maybe end of the year, let's do a check-in and kind of see where everybody's at. Maybe we can do a follow-up episode too. Another tip too, if you don't have a lot of space, you don't have a patio to set it out on, maybe put it in the freezer. So I know we were chatting recently. I was in Mexico for a bit. When I was there in Mexico, I put everything in the freezer in a separate container. So then it doesn't get in your way or you don't smell it. So that is an option too. Stick it in your freezer. And then when you're ready to take it to a center or a compost location, you're all set. So that works too.
I love it, Stephanie. That's a great little life hack, a little trick. I don't tell people this, but I do that. I do that when I travel for work, because I travel all the time for work. And if I'm ready to scramble out the door and I know things aren't, out to the curb yet, it's technique, right?
Yeah. I mean, it keeps the smell away, and worry about it when you get home. So, well, it's good to hear that you do that too. Perfect.
But the home composting doesn't need to be complicated. There's a lot of resources out there and web links that can teach you how to home compost. There's also a lot of outdoor home compost bins that you can get, like little rotational bins. There's a broad multitude of ways to get activated in composting. And the other thing that you mentioned, Stephanie, is the opportunity for regional gardens and regional composting. So this is something that's really popping up. I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and there's a lot of these starting to pop up, right? Grassroots efforts, which I love when people take grassroots initiatives. But there's a lot of people who have community gardens, and with the community gardens, they have set up a community compost bin that enables them to create those nutrient-rich soils to put on their gardens. So these are other great mechanisms that listeners can do to jumpstart the process of composting in your homes.
Yeah, and I'll do a little plug for a contact of mine. She has a company called Go Posty. So she has YouTube videos on how to compost at home, and it's like basically 2 5-gallon buckets together with holes in one of them, and you add your peelings from your vegetables and fruit, and you add in old dried leaves and sticks and, maybe a little bit of soil to help it kind of meld and compost together. So there's various ways of doing it. You can even use earthworms to help compost. So that's not for everybody, but that is another good resource too. I'd recommend people to go to her site, Go Posty, and and learn how to do it at home.
Oh, that's excellent. And you touched on another point there is that, we talk about like organic waste, we talk about food scraps. When you make a proper compost, it takes a blend of food scraps and green waste. Mm-hmm. And in the technical term, we call it the nitrogen to carbon, right? And you have to have a little bit of both in order to create that stable product. So as you talked about your friend, telling you to put, yard waste in there, et cetera, mm-hmm. That's an important piece of getting that balance and getting that stable product as an output.
Yeah, it's way more complex than I thought, but it was really cool to learn about it. And I feel that you're doing some benefit for the environment. Again, let's keep everybody to that challenge. So we want to hear your feedback too. So hopefully we'll get some comments and feedback. Should start a new hashtag, show us your compost.
Well, I'll tell you something else fun. Another fun story. Keep on this, kind of exciting part of it. I started doing composting in my house. Mm-hmm. And again, part of my personal journey. And I was learning, right? I was just trying to figure it all out. And when I started doing it, I started telling my friends about it in my neighborhood. Well, I've become pretty popular in my neighborhood because all these people who have gardens ask me for my compost. Oh. So I literally get texts and emails from neighbors and friends saying, hey, do you have any more compost ready? I need some. And so we actually I built this like little sharing community mm-hmm. where I've got a little bucket of compost. And people put their name when they want compost, and I work my way down the list, and I walk over to their house, I leave the bucket on their front door, they use the compost and give me an empty bucket back.
Okay. That's perfect. I like that.
Yeah, it's fun. It builds relationships mm-hmm. and you're doing great things for the environment in the process.
Yeah, and you're actually improving your health too, because you're not using a fake fertilizer or pesticide. You're using, home natural compost. So that's really great. And adding more vitamins to your vegetables. So perfect. So tell us a little bit more about your background in sustainability. So I know you've worked for different paper sources of materials, and I know we met in the paper industry. So yeah, just tell us a little bit more about how you got started in this space.
Yeah, no, I love telling my sustainability story because it frankly mirrors my life story quite a bit. It's quite exciting. I started my career in Kraft Foods right out of college at Michigan State University. And it's kind of fun to tell that story because that was my first sustainability experience. When we're consumers and we look at our packaging, we look at our packaging as a single entity. Right? This is what's on my plate. This is what's in my pantry. This is what I'm using right now. And that's our perspective of it. Now, we hear in the news about these broader systemic issues, but that's always them, those, external, right? When I started working with Kraft Foods right out of college, I got my first experience at standing on the end of a production line that is making packaging. And when these production lines that make packaging that go into your household are running, they're running at hundreds or thousands of feet per minute. To the speeds where you got to have like high-speed cameras in order to see it. And when you get in that position, you start to realize that, there's a responsibility that comes with the job where all that product that's going into the marketplace needs to have a very solid sustainability story, right? And you've got to have a very pragmatic solution for what's going to happen to that material in the marketplace because you're pushing it out into the world, right? You're pushing it in the environment. You need to have a good pathway for it. I think that idea became cemented even further when I took my next job, which was with the Amway Corporation, and I was tasked with building their supply chain in India. So I spent several years boots on the ground working in India, building their supply chain. And if any of your listeners have been to India, you know very well that there's a very real sustainability challenge with litter control, and improper waste handling. And that's a situation where I saw it firsthand. I was like, okay, yes, it's a challenge in India, but frankly, this is what the whole world's going to be facing very soon if we don't start taking this very seriously. So I think by the time I got back from those couple of years in India, it was pretty concrete in my mind that my career going forward was going to be anchored in and around building sustainability solutions. And I think another, kind of a fun story from early in the days of the career was when I first started working at Kraft Foods, we didn't have savvy tools such as life cycle analysis, right? I mean, I don't want to date myself, but frankly, we didn't have computers on either. It was pen and paper, mm-hmm. and you had to go to the library and get books to do research.
Yep.
But I remember doing my first life cycle analysis when I was probably 20 some years old. And basically what I did was I adopted a purchasing tool called total cost of ownership, TCO. And I took the TCO model and I built it around the lens of sustainability. And I went out and I researched all the adjacencies, all the touch points that go around the package to come up with a quantifiable analysis to look at what was the environmental impact of the decisions we were going to make. And at the time, we were looking at what was the right business decision. Should we go with a flexible stand-up pouch, which was a Capri Sun? Should we go with a Tetra Pak, which was those old, like the kids' little sippy boxes? And then the other option was a blow molded plastic container. And so I used that technique, back in my 20s and came up with a recommendation to the corporation on which one I thought had, the best environmental impact. And so I think that's exciting for me to go back and reflect on that because, today you look at how this has become such a big issue and a big opportunity and how robust and sophisticated those tools are available now that brands are using to make these decisions. And it's always fun when you have the ability to start, from the very beginning with pen and paper.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we know the world in both places, pre-computer and now. So yeah. Yep. Sometimes I miss the old days, but it's nice to have everything more available.
Yeah, it's fun to reminisce like that. But, I've done a lot in terms of since then helping major brands. More recently, when I was consulting, I was working with major brands to write up their sustainability strategies in their roadmaps. And that involves everything from ESG investing to the scorecards. If you grab any major brand sustainability report, you're going to find a very complex accounting table that's listed somewhere in the report that's written to GRI or SASB standards. And that's if your readers or listeners are really interested in going deep, that's a good place to go study and to do research and look at those details. Because once you understand those matrices and you understand what's being listed in those, then you start to understand the levers and the accountability measures to which brands are measuring against. And as you understand what the brands are measuring against, it enables you to build strategies that are very progressive to help them achieve their goals.
Yeah.
So I just basically jumped from the old school pen and paper to the most high tech of the spectrum.
Yeah. Well, that's good. You've seen all of it and now you know how to be most efficient.
Well, the trick, Stephanie, comes in the in-between, frankly. It's one thing to point at the fence and say, we're going to go here. That's a very big and audacious part of leadership. But that's another thing to figure out, all right, how do we get there? And right now, that's where our world's at. The leaders have now pointed the fence and said, we need to go there. And then all the middle management, all the people in between are now scratching their heads saying, okay, I hear you. How do we do it? And that's where TIPA comes into play, right? Because we create a pathway for them to actually achieve these goals. And that's where the advocacy work that I talked about earlier comes into play, because now we need to build the infrastructure and the strategy to ladder up all the way through to legislators to make sure that things are being codified so that these can actually happen. Because circularity happens when the system actually spins. And if the system stumbles, and if it's got roadblocks and if things aren't running smoothly, then the machine doesn't spin. And so that's what we got to be working on is how do we, get that in motion all the way around by building real world solutions. And that's the roadmaps that really drive the progress.
Definitely. And how, TIPA has a product that allows you to compost. So it's great that it's all connected and that you are providing the education. So you give them the product, but then you have to show them, how they handle it afterwards. So it's really the zero waste mentality and the end of life, like what you do with it. Yeah, I think that's super important.
Right. Have you heard a lot of the brands will declare that their goals are to be reusable, recyclable, or compostable? Right? The three big pillars.
Yep.
That all stems from GRI SASB, policies, right? That ladders up all the way through those policies. But what we're looking at is we're saying, okay, we hear you and we've got a solution. And we got solutions available now. So if people want to implement it, give us a call and we'll be happy to tell them how.
I want everybody to be using this type of packaging. It's so important. And just being selective too as a consumer that you purchase from a brand that has zero waste packaging or compostable packaging. So I think it's super important, or even reusable too, like a jar exchange program. So I've seen in Europe, it's really big to have a coffee cup that you pay a €1 fee and you bring it in and reuse it. And it's all part of the transaction. So I think all of that is necessary right now. And as consumers, we have the voice and the power to choose where we put our dollars.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the issues are big and they're systemic and they're here now, right? So we need to be bringing all forces to the table to be part of the solution and to stop being part of the problem. And the consumers are the key advocates to do that, because they're setting the cadence of the demand and they're sending the very clear messaging to hold people accountable. And you vote with your dollars. So when you go to a company that is using certified compostable packaging, you choose that because you know that that's a better choice and that you support it.
So, and it's interesting to learn, about your background and all of the experiences you've had, and how, seeing these problems in India, for example, that kind of really inspired you to go on this path and really dive deeper. So what is maybe a message that you'd give to listeners on how they can impact the environment or society by their actions? I know we just kind of touched upon a little of that about with your dollars and what you purchase.
Yeah, I always like to encourage people to get educated, to be interested, to start with the heart, a desire and a want, right? And then engage the mind and start doing research and start reading, asking good questions. Don't jump to conclusions. There's a lot of greenwashing out there. There's a lot of bogus marketing going on. Jump right to the facts. Start doing the research. Find your place in the story and actually start getting engaged. Take action, right? And there's so many ways that you can plug in on a local level. There's so many ways that you can be part of the solution. And voting with your dollars is important. Make good choices. Forego something that might not be beneficial and choose something that's going to be better for the environment. And if you have questions about that, reach out and find some expertise and talk to people. And I'm more than happy to be that resource for people who have questions on composting and compostable packaging. Feel free to reach out to us at TIPA, and I'm sure anyone within our TIPA team would be more than happy to help give people good guidance in that.
Perfect. Yeah, and I know it's super important for individuals to not just vote with their dollars, but education is key. So I think that as companies have, transparency is becoming more and more needed. That, for example, the certifications that TIPA has and is received, that if you can find that easily from the company or talk to somebody there, that's super important too. You shouldn't have to dig too far for this information to avoid the greenwashing and things like that. So it's important to have all that information at hand and learn enough to know what you're looking for those certifications.
Yeah, in fact, I'll add one more discrete action on there because it's near and dear to my heart. There is a federal level legislation right now that is circulating. It's called the Compost Act. And if any of your listeners would like to go research that legislation, it's a bipartisan written legislation where it supports getting funding for expanding infrastructure for composting. We would love to get as many people writing into their congressional leaders in order to see that we get that bill passed.
Perfect. Yeah, definitely include that information too. That's important to have all of that available locally. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
So kind of a broad question here, and we've covered a lot of things already. I hope it's not too repetitive, but what does preserving the environment mean to you as a concept?
Yeah, preserving the environment, I guess for me personally, I choose to live what I call like a low wig lifestyle, which means I want to move through the world and leave, as least of an impact as I can. That's just kind of the way that I personally choose to live my life. I know that's not for everybody, but that's the way I like to play it. When I think of sustainability, it's all about putting things into balance, and it's all about keeping things in motion and circularity, right? And making sure that you're not creating, the waste and the emissions, right? And those are the things to be mindful of, right? Making good choices. And oftentimes in my personal life, what I find is the less is more actually works well. Buying quality, buying products that have intentionality behind them, like they've been thought through with a purpose, and taking care of them, right? A little bit of a different mindset than the linear economy, which is anchored in the idea of take, make, waste, right? And the generation before us, if you will, grew up in a linear economy. And the business model that went with that was you take it from the earth, you make something, and you just throw it away. And where we're at now in this chapter is moving to circularity. And that requires a whole new economic way of thinking, which is the idea that it's not just take, make, waste, it's harvest, it's create products, and it's find ways for those products to be safely returned back to the earth or back to creating new products, right? And what we have to worry about in that circularity model is an unpleasant term called leakage. And leakage is basically the idea that when something doesn't go circular, it leaks into the environment. And when it leaks into the environment, from whatever source, whether it's gas or liquid or solids, right? When it leaks in the environment, it creates damages. And there's a multitude of different damages, whether it's global warming, ecotoxicity, bioaccumulation of plastic waste. These things do harm to the environment. And so making good choices that minimize those impacts and keep things in circularity is something we're all going to have to be thinking about going forward.
Yeah, and you made some very good points there. It's, kind of ingrained into us from past generations in this type of throwaway society where we don't always repair things anymore, or we just buy, and this like overconsumption. Not to be too hard on ourselves, but we have to take responsibility and make these small steps to consume less and repair and use things. I lived out of a carry-on for almost 6 months most recently. So it is possible to have a very small amount of clothes, for example, and consume not as much. But it's a whole lifestyle change. And maybe start small. Start with one area. Start with your kitchen and composting. So, it's a step that we all have to take responsibility for.
Stephanie, you make a good point there, because those small steps are important. They really, really are, because businesses these days are all measured on performance-based percentages. And when everybody makes a very slight change to their behavior, the percentages show it. When the percentages show it, the businesses calibrate and respond to those consumer behavioral changes. So even if you're making a little bit of an effort and you're trying to do different things, that's going to materialize in carrying momentum forward for more products, more innovations to be developed to meet that consumer behavioral need. You're adapting your lifestyle, and the brands and the companies that produce the products you want will follow that suit. So you are leading it by making those small changes.
Yeah, most definitely. So I know we talked about the fun little tip of, putting your compost in the freezer if you can't throw it away and you don't want it to smell. Is there any other eco or sustainable rituals that you do daily or weekly that you'd maybe encourage listeners to try?
That's not my main one. I try to buy, like I said, sustainably oriented products. And I am very conscientious about, the waste streams and the composting and, the recycling of the rigid plastics, if you will. And just really enjoying a lifestyle that tries to leave as small a footprint as possible.
Yeah, or even buying, like, for example, something not everybody would think about, kind of back to the kitchen theme with composting, that your soap that you use to clean your dishes, is that biodegradable? It may not be. So making sure that product is also healthy for the environment once it goes down your drain. And then also, what packaging is it in? Can you refill it at a bulk food store or what have you? So that's important too. So kind of some more tips there or points to look at that you don't always think of if you've, bought the same brand every time you go shopping, to really kind of take a second look.
Yeah. So when we look at strategically in that narrative, there's the sourcing of where, how products are sourced. There's which is I consider inputs. There's the process, which is how companies make the products. And then there's the output, which is basically the end of life, what happens to it afterwards. So as you're buying into products, when you give those considerations, it gives you, these three lenses to look at in terms of how well a company's doing in producing the products you like, right? And so when you think like inputs, the progressive thoughts are around using, plant-based products, right? Regenerative agricultural-based products, looking at core issues like ecotoxicity, right? There's a lot of really compelling work going on in the field of chemistry and green chemistries. And when you think about like your cleaning detergents, your personal care items, that's a very progressive trend, is looking at what are the raw materials that are being utilized. How are they being harvested? Is it being, clear-cut rainforests? Is it coming from taking advantage of people groups? So these are all considerations to which we apply on the front end of your input, your feedstocks. And then on the back end, the output is going to be, what do you do with them when you're done, right? And in between the whole process piece is the green manufacturing, if you will. That's the use of solar energy. That's the use of controlling emissions, responsible, treatment of any waste streams, these sort of details. So when I go shopping and I look, I'm obviously, very steeped in this area. So when I look, these are things I look at. And when I look at comparative analysis of one company's performance versus another's, those are the different types of lenses that I'm analyzing in terms of how they're actually performing. And that's a significant level of depth beyond just the marketing, right? That gets into the real detail analysis of what a company's doing.
Yeah, and it is important to look at all of that. Hopefully that positive change will keep happening with companies with TIPA that you work for, that, we have that full transparency and exactly what these companies are doing. And that sustainability means not just environmental, but also social, like who is making these materials, and if it's in developing countries or where it's happening, what have you, is it local, how is it being transported? It's all connected. So I think all important things to look at, but not be too overwhelmed at the same time either.
No, but there are also good things to definitely look at if you're an investor. Because if you're an individual stock investor, these are key things that you can also be looking at in making your decisions.
True, yeah, because I think a lot of us forget that, where you have your 401k, is that firm that's managing your money, do they invest sustainably? And that is probably one of the biggest personal impacts you can do too for the environment, is to invest in a more socially and environmentally responsible company. And it's nice to see those options become more available for companies and for individuals, that they have those type of investing options. So like eToro is a platform you can invest, and you can have separate portfolios and different things. So I think it's nice to see all that happening too. So
it's all connected together.
It really is. Yep. So champions for positive change. So another fun question, is there a personal mantra or theme song that kind of gets you into a good place or redirects your mindset to a good place?
That's a funny question.
Yeah.
We had this conversation not too long ago, on a team meeting I was at. I'm a music guy. I've got a playlist for like every single activity and mood and whatever. So really I kind of queue up what I need for the moment. But usually if I want to get myself rocking and rolling, I love putting up, something that's got a really strong beat, and that, I like the good lyrics. So I don't have a particular A song, but certainly I'm with you there in terms of having, playlist for the moment.
I do that too. I think I have a playlist for every season. Like I have one from Germany summer 2021, and or if I travel, I like to find local music for the country I'm in. That's very fun too, and it kind of brings you back to that time you spent there. So yeah, a lot of fun. So
anytime I go somewhere, I'm making a custom playlist for it. If I'm going to a party, I'm making a custom playlist. I'm always
perfect.
It's the old days of mixtapes.
Oh my gosh, I used to make the cassettes from the radio songs I liked, and then I started doing CDs for friends, like if we do a road trip or So we'll maybe have to share our Spotify or iTunes accounts. We can listen to each other's playlists.
I would love that. It'd be a ton of fun.
Perfect. Yeah, let's do it. So another fun question. Are there any other podcasts that you'd recommend or books you recently read that you would encourage listeners to maybe learn more about sustainability or self-development, things like that?
Yeah, I'm an information nerd. I consume mass quantities of information. I love it. Podcasts are some of my favorites because I like to exercise a lot. And when I exercise, put my podcast in. When I'm done, I feel like a rock star, because I've done both my body and my mind.
Yeah.
On podcasts, I like Science Friday. I like Hidden Brain. On the sustainability side, there's Nothing Wasted. There's Paper 360. I like to listen to my church podcast, which I very much enjoy, which is Passion City. And then on the book side, um, I read a ton of research for work. So a lot of my research on sustainability, it's not a particular book. It's a multitude of just scouring of research in the marketplace. But I've always been inspired by, early in my career was a management book. There's a biography, frankly, The Method by Eric Ryan and Adam Lowry from Method Home Cleaning. And I love that book because it really honed in on the importance of company culture and how company culture can be a key change agent to drive things like sustainability, to break through barriers. And that one always I find refreshing because it's just got such a fun, upbeat, high cadence to it. And it's all about disruptive innovation. It's nothing the normal. It's 100% about, how do you go about, be a thought leader and break through barriers. And I think it's just very bold. And I've really enjoyed that one.
Very great. Yeah, I'll have to write that one down for listeners to check out. And I haven't read that one either, so add it to my list.
Yeah.
So, and lastly, how can listeners reach you?
Oh, yeah. I'm happy to talk to people. Probably LinkedIn's the best way to contact me. And otherwise, through TIPA Corp is a good way to reach me as well. And I'm more than happy to connect people on LinkedIn. And if we want to get into, more detailed conversations, we could set up, a phone call or a meeting or something to talk more.
Perfect. Well, this has been such a fun conversation, learning about TIPA Corp and compostable packaging and learning about your background and talking about sustainability. So yeah, I really appreciate your time and thanks everybody for listening. Have a great day.
Stephanie, it's been an honor. Thank you so much for having me.
Into your eyes.